When love was tested, betrayal came from where he trusted most, and salvation from where he never thought to look. He thought he had found love, until one test revealed a truth so painful it completely destroyed him. But in the shadows of betrayal, something unexpected was about to change everything. A storm, a secret, something he never saw coming. What happens when the people you trust most are the ones who break you? Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The mansion was a palace of glass and steel, perched high above the New York City skyline, but inside its walls silence hung heavy, like a constant reminder that wealth could not buy warmth. Gabriel Lancaster, once hailed as the sharpest mind in the business world, stood at the massive window with his hands buried in his pockets, staring at the glittering lights below. To the world, he was untouchable, a billionaire who had everything. But to himself, he was a man who trusted nothing and no one. His reflection on the glass betrayed the truth. Sharp suit, tired eyes, a jaw tightened not by confidence but by suspicion. He pressed his fingers lightly against the cold glass. They all want something. Every single one of them. Gabriel's fiancée, Clarissa Moore, had arrived in his life 2 years ago like a breath of fresh air, or at least that's how it had seemed at first. Tall, elegant, with an allure that made cameras flash and men turn their heads, she was the picture of perfection. Everyone whispered that Gabriel was finally human, finally in love. But the whispers inside him said otherwise. Her affection often felt more like performance than devotion. He'd seen the way her eyes lingered on expensive jewelry, how her laughter grew louder at charity galas when investors gathered around, how her touch grew lighter when no one was watching. It was the small things that made Gabriel wonder if she truly loved him, or only the empire he represented. And that doubt grew like a thorn in his chest, which was why tonight, in the echo of his empty study, he had decided. He would test her, not with roses, not with promises, but with the one thing that stripped away all illusions, weakness. He would pretend he was paralyzed, unable to walk, unable to stand tall as the titan of industry. And then he would see if Clarissa's love remained when his power was gone. Gabriel didn't know that in creating this deception, he was about to unravel more than Clarissa's heart. He was about to collide with someone he had never truly noticed before. Someone who would prove that true love doesn't arrive in diamonds or gowns, but in quiet hands that steady you when the world turns away. In another corner of the house, far away from the glittering window and brooding thoughts of billionaires, a young woman bent over a marble floor, scrubbing diligently though her fingers ached. Her name was Elena Cruz. She had worked as a maid in the Lancaster estate for just under a year, though most of the household barely noticed her. She was small, quick, efficient, someone whose presence was felt only in the cleanliness she left behind. A fresh bed, polished surface, a spotless hallway. But Elena carried stories in her eyes that no one asked to hear. She'd grown up in the city's poorest district, the eldest daughter of a mother who worked 2 jobs until illness stole her strength. Elena had dropped out of school at 16, trading books for shifts in diners, laundromats, and finally here, in the sprawling mansion where her life brushed against luxury but never belonged to it. She wasn't bitter, not outwardly. She had learned that bitterness consumed the soul faster than hunger. But sometimes, in the quiet of midnight when she was folding linens, she wondered what it would feel like to be seen. Not as help, not as background, but as a person worth remembering. Her hands were cracked from constant work, yet steady. Her heart was weary, yet still open. And it was this heart, hidden in plain sight, that would soon be tested in ways Elena could never imagine. The night Clarissa returned from a gala in her glittering silver gown, Gabriel finally spoke his plan aloud. He sat in the vast living room, pretending his legs ached, leaning heavily against the couch. Clarissa's heels clicked sharply as she walked in, her perfume trailing like a cloud of roses and money. "Darling," she said smoothly, dropping a jeweled clutch onto the table. "You look pale. What's wrong?" Gabriel forced a faint, weary smile. Something happened today. At the doctor's. Her perfectly arched brows lifted, though her eyes didn't show fear so much as calculation. What kind of something? They think I won't walk again, Gabriel said, lowering his gaze as though ashamed. Some condition affecting my spine. It's irreversible. The silence stretched, long enough that Gabriel's heart pounded in his chest. Clarissa finally stepped closer, her hand brushing his shoulder lightly. So lightly it barely felt like touch at all. We'll get the best doctors. Money can fix anything. It can't, Gabriel whispered, watching her carefully. This time it can't. Her hand froze. For the smallest fraction of a second, her mask slipped. The warmth faded, replaced by something cold, uncertain. And then, as though remembering her role, she smiled brightly and kissed his temple. You don't need to worry about me, Gabriel. I'll adjust. We'll adjust. But in her eyes, Gabriel saw the truth. And in that truth, his decision hardened. This test would reveal everything. What he didn't see, however, was Elena standing just outside the hallway, holding a tray she had meant to deliver. She lowered her eyes quickly, as though invisible again. Yet the words she had overheard burned in her chest. The great Gabriel Lancaster, paralyzed? Her heart ached. Not for his wealth, not for his name, but for the quiet despair she had heard in his voice. And though she didn't know it yet, that ache would grow into something far stronger than pity. Do you believe love should ever be tested? Or does testing it already prove you don't trust it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know how you see it. The following morning, the Lancaster estate buzzed with its usual quiet efficiency. Maids dusting the endless bookshelves, gardeners trimming hedges sculpted like works of art, and chefs preparing elaborate breakfasts Gabriel rarely touched. Clarissa, still in her silk robe, descended the staircase slowly, scrolling through her phone with a faint smirk. She was already replying to invitations, commenting on photos, accepting another gala dinner 2 nights from now. Gabriel sat at the breakfast table, posture slightly slouched as he maintained the illusion of weakness. He stirred his coffee but didn't sip it. His eyes followed Clarissa as she kissed him quickly on the cheek, perfunctory, like checking a task off her list. Darling, I'll be out most of the day, she said, already turning toward the door. Charity brunch, meeting with the designers for the engagement party, then cocktails with the Vandermeer twins. You'll be fine, yes? Her words were coated in sugar, but her tone dripped with impatience. Gabriel swallowed hard. Of course, don't worry about me. And just like that, she was gone, heels echoing until the front door clicked shut. Gabriel sat in the cavernous dining hall, the silence stretching across the polished floor like a ghost. He clenched his jaw. Barely a pause, barely a glance. He had thought pretending paralysis would bring him closer to the truth, but already it felt like a blade twisting in his chest. From the corner, Elena entered quietly with a tray, replacing the untouched croissant and refilling his cup. She didn't speak at first. Maids weren't meant to speak unless spoken to. But her eyes flickered to his untouched plate, then back to his tired face. You don't like the eggs, sir? She asked softly, almost apologetic for noticing. Gabriel blinked. Most of the staff never addressed him beyond yes, sir, or no, sir. He shook his head faintly. Not hungry. Elena hesitated, her hands tightening on the tray. Then, in a tone barely above a whisper, she said, Sometimes, when food tastes like nothing, it isn't the food that's the problem. Gabriel looked at her sharply. The maid lowered her eyes, cheeks flushed, and quickly excused herself. But her words echoed louder than Clarissa's entire morning speech. Later that afternoon, Gabriel wheeled himself, unnecessarily but convincingly, in a chair across the sunroom, where the light bathed the floor in warm patterns. He thought of Elena's remark, her voice timid but sincere. It unsettled him because it came from a place of human understanding, not obligation. Clarissa's voice drifted from the garden as she took a call on speakerphone. Of course I'll still attend, don't be ridiculous, she said, laughing. Gabriel's situation doesn't mean I'm disappearing from society. Honestly, if I'm trapped in that house too much, I'll lose my mind. He's been so needy lately." Her laughter was like glass breaking in Gabriel's ears. He gripped the arm of his chair until his knuckles whitened. Needy. The word struck deeper than he expected. He shifted back, wheels squeaking softly against the marble floor, retreating into silence. His plan was working too well. That evening, Elena crossed paths with him again. She was polishing the silver when Gabriel appeared in the hallway. She startled slightly, bowing her head. "You're working late," he observed. "There's always work to be done, sir," she replied quietly. He studied her for a moment. She avoided his gaze, but there was a softness in her presence that made the air feel less suffocating. Finally, Gabriel asked, almost against his better judgment, "Do you ever feel invisible here?" The question startled her. Her cloth froze against the silver tray. Slowly, she looked up. "Invisible? Yes, you do everything. Yet no one notices." Her lips parted, but words faltered. Then she smiled faintly, but it was a sad smile. Sometimes invisibility is safer. Something in her tone tugged at Gabriel. Safe. She had learned to survive by being unseen. He realized with a jolt that while Clarissa craved to be seen by everyone, Elena had lived her life unseen. And yet, in that moment, Gabriel noticed her more than anyone else. That night, Gabriel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Clarissa had returned late, smelling of champagne and stranger's perfume. She had slipped into bed without a word, without even looking at him. Meanwhile, the memory of Elena's quiet voice lingered. Sometimes invisibility is safer. It was the kind of truth that couldn't be faked. And it haunted him more than Clarissa's hollow affection. Do you think Gabriel is being unfair by testing Clarissa? Or is it better to uncover the truth, even if it hurts? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. 2 nights later, the Lancaster mansion hosted a dinner Clarissa had insisted on keeping. "It will be a small thing," she had told Gabriel sweetly, brushing her hand against his shoulder. "Just a few close friends. We can't vanish from society, darling. People will talk." Gabriel had nodded, concealing the sting. People. It always came back to people. Their opinions, their applause, their whispers. He agreed to sit at the table, his wheelchair positioned at the head. The guests arrived in glittering dresses and crisp tuxedos, their laughter echoing like clinking glasses. They greeted Clarissa with admiration, but when their eyes landed on Gabriel, their tones softened to polite pity. "How are you holding up?" one asked gently. "Such a tragedy," another murmured. "You're lucky to have Clarissa by your side." Lucky. The word tasted bitter. Clarissa soaked in the attention, smiling gracefully as though she were the noble heroine of a tragic love story. She held Gabriel's hand only when eyes were on her, and when they turned away, her fingers slipped free. Gabriel felt the hollowness of it all pressing in, but he forced himself to play along, letting the illusion breathe. Elena, dressed in her plain uniform, moved silently between the guests, refilling glasses and carrying trays. She wasn't meant to be noticed, yet she noticed everything. She saw how Clarissa's smile stretched wider when a wealthy guest complimented her gown. She saw Gabriel's shoulders tighten when someone spoke of his bravery. She saw the quiet flicker of pain in his eyes when Clarissa laughed too brightly at a joke that wasn't his. And she saw the loneliness in his gaze when he thought no one was looking. For a moment, Elena's eyes met his across the room. It was fleeting, just a heartbeat, but it carried more weight than all the empty words surrounding him. Later that night, after the last guest had gone, Gabriel wheeled himself toward the library. Clarissa trailed behind, her heels clicking impatiently. "Gabriel," she sighed, tossing her earrings onto the table. "You hardly spoke all evening. People noticed. It was uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable for you?" Gabriel asked quietly. Her tone sharpened. "For everyone. If you're going to be in this state, you need to make an effort. I can't carry everything on my own." The words sliced through him like knives. This state. Clarissa didn't even pretend to hide the annoyance anymore. She was tired of the act, tired of the burden. Gabriel lowered his eyes, masking the storm inside. "You're right. I'll try harder." Clarissa kissed his cheek lightly, already turning away. "Good. I'm meeting friends tomorrow. Don't wait up." When the door closed behind her, Gabriel sat in silence, his jaw trembling with rage and despair. The test was working. Clarissa was revealing her truth. But the cost of knowing was heavier than he had expected. Elena entered quietly to clear the empty glasses left from the party. She glanced at Gabriel, hesitated, then asked gently, "Would you like me to bring tea, sir? Something to help you rest?" Gabriel looked up, searching her face. There was no pretense, no calculation in her eyes, just quiet concern. He nodded slowly. "Yes, thank you, Elena." As she turned to leave, he found himself speaking again, his voice softer than he intended. "You were watching tonight." She paused, tray in hand. "I only watch because it's my job, sir." "No," he said, his tone firmer. "You saw more than anyone else." Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. She bowed her head quickly and slipped out, her footsteps fading into the silence. Gabriel leaned back, exhaling heavily. He had set out to test one woman's love. Instead, he was beginning to see another's truth. And though he didn't yet know it, that truth would save his life. Do you think Gabriel should reveal his lie now before the pain grows deeper? Or should he continue to test Clarissa until she fully shows her true colors? What would you do? Share your answer in the comments. The days that followed dragged like heavy chains. Gabriel kept up the charade of paralysis, every movement carefully restrained, every word measured to sound weary. Each time he lowered himself into the wheelchair, a piece of his pride splintered. But he told himself it was worth it. This was the only way to know the truth. Yet the truth hurt more than he had imagined. Clarissa grew colder with each passing day. At first, she made an effort, kissing his forehead before leaving, sitting by his side with feigned patience. But soon, the veneer faded. She spent more nights away, her laughter trailing through phone calls in other rooms. When she was home, her eyes flickered with irritation whenever Gabriel asked for help with something small, like reaching a book or pouring water. "You should really consider hiring a nurse," she muttered one evening, scrolling through her phone while Gabriel sat beside her. "I'm not trained for this sort of thing, and it's exhausting." The word hit him like a slap. Exhausting. He almost wanted to shout, "I'm not even sick," but he stayed silent, forcing the mask of weakness tighter. That night, as Clarissa disappeared upstairs, Gabriel remained in the dim glow of the study lamp, his hands trembling around the armrests of the chair. His chest burned with a mixture of fury and grief. This was the woman he had once thought might share his life. This was love. And then, like a bomb on raw skin, a soft voice broke the silence. "Do you need help, sir?" Elena stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with concern. She had seen him struggling to shift in his chair, the frustration etched into every line of his face. Gabriel blinked, startled. He hadn't heard her enter. "I know. I'm fine." But she didn't move. She lingered, hands clasped before her, watching him with the kind of attentiveness Clarissa hadn't shown in weeks. "Sometimes it's all right to ask for help," Elena said gently. Gabriel let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Not in my world." Her brow furrowed, and though she said nothing, her silence spoke louder than words. She wanted to argue, to tell him that no one was meant to carry everything alone, but she didn't. Instead, she crossed the room, adjusted the blanket that had slipped from his lap, and quietly retreated. Her presence lingered long after she left. The following afternoon, Clarissa announced she was flying to the coast for the weekend with friends. She leaned down to kiss Gabriel goodbye, her lips brushing his cheek like a passing breeze. "Try not to mope while I'm gone," she said lightly. "You'll drive the staff insane." And just like that, she was gone, her perfume trailing behind her. Gabriel sat in stunned silence, his jaw tightening. He had thought she might at least hesitate, show some guilt for abandoning him in his so-called condition. But no, she had left without a second thought. The weight of betrayal pressed hard against his chest. He felt trapped in his own lie, drowning in a reality he had created. When the door clicked shut again, Elena appeared at the edge of the hallway, carrying a basket of folded linens. She looked uncertain, as though she had overheard the exchange but didn't dare comment. Gabriel caught her gaze and, for reasons he couldn't explain, said softly, "She's gone." Elena hesitated. Then, with a quiet nod, she replied, "You're not alone, sir." The words were simple, almost matter-of-fact, but they cracked something in Gabriel's chest, something he had kept locked for years. He swallowed hard. "Do you really believe that?" She met his eyes fully this time. "Yes, because sometimes the people we think we can't count on leave, and the ones we least expect stay." For a moment, the world stopped. Gabriel stared at her, unable to respond. His throat tightened, his carefully built walls trembling. Elena lowered her gaze again quickly, as though she had said too much. She turned and disappeared down the corridor, leaving Gabriel with her words echoing louder than the silence of the empty mansion. That night, sleep evaded him. He lay awake in the vast, cold bed, Clarissa's absence glaring. He thought of Elena's voice, steady yet vulnerable. She had spoken like someone who had lived that truth. Abandonment, loss, and still she chose to stay. Gabriel realized something terrifying. In her quiet way, Elena had given him more comfort in a single sentence than Clarissa had in weeks, and that realization cut deeper than any betrayal. Have you ever been surprised by who truly stood by your side in a difficult time? Sometimes it's not who you expect. Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear. The weekend passed in a blur of hollow hours. The Lancaster mansion was quieter than usual, its vast hallways echoing with nothing but the faint hum of the air system and the soft footsteps of staff. Gabriel spent most of the time in the library, books open before him though his eyes barely moved across the pages. He found himself listening for the sound of Clarissa's heels, the trill of her laughter, the familiar rhythm of someone who was supposed to belong at his side. But the house remained empty of her presence. Instead, he noticed other sounds. The clink of dishes in the kitchen, the faint strains of humming as Elena worked upstairs, the steady rhythm of someone who was there, even when no one asked her to be. On Sunday evening, Clarissa called. Gabriel's phone buzzed beside him on the table. He picked it up, hesitating a moment before answering. "Hello, darling." Clarissa's voice rang with cheer. "I hope you're doing well. The beach house is stunning, you'd love the view. Oh, and the gala was divine. Everyone asked about you. They all send their love." Gabriel clenched his jaw. "You sound busy." Yes," she said casually. "But don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow evening. Oh, and could you have the chef prepare something light for dinner when I return? Nothing too heavy. I've been indulging all weekend." His throat tightened. "Clarissa, do you even care what this feels like for me?" There was a pause, the kind that revealed more than words. Then she sighed. "Gabriel, you're being dramatic. You're not dying. You just can't walk. I don't know what you expect me to do. Sit in that house all day while life passes me by." The line cut with a finality that left Gabriel frozen, the silence on his end heavy and suffocating. She didn't even notice. "Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. Try to rest." The call ended. Gabriel lowered the phone slowly, his hand trembling. For a moment, he thought he might throw it across the room, but instead he let it fall onto the table with a dull thud. His heart pounded. His test was revealing Clarissa's truth, and it was uglier than he had ever feared. Later that night, as Gabriel sat in the dim study, Elena appeared again. She carried a teapot and a single cup on a tray. "You haven't eaten since morning," she said gently. "I thought tea might help." Gabriel looked at her, his chest heavy. "Do you always do this? Notice when people are falling apart?" Elena paused, setting the tray down carefully. Her voice was quiet, almost reluctant. "I notice because no one ever noticed me, and I know what it feels like to be invisible." The words struck him harder than Clarissa's indifference had. He swallowed, struggling to find a reply. Elena poured the tea, her hand steady despite the crack in her voice. Sometimes the smallest kindness makes all the difference. It doesn't cost much to care. Gabriel stared at her, feeling something stir inside him. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. Connection. Humanity. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice raw. For the first time, Elena smiled. Not the polite curve she wore as part of her duties, but something softer, real. And in that smile, Gabriel felt a spark of warmth that the mansion had long been missing. The next evening, Clarissa returned. Her skin glowed from the sun, her arms stacked with shopping bags, her laughter still trailing from a phone call she ended only as she stepped into the foyer. "Gabriel," she greeted, kissing the air beside his cheek. "Did you miss me?" Gabriel nodded faintly, masking the storm inside. Of course. She didn't notice the hollowness in his tone. She never noticed. Dinner that night was awkward. Clarissa talked endlessly about the gala, the people she had met, the compliments she had received. Gabriel listened in silence, pushing food around his plate. Elena moved quietly in the background, refilling glasses and clearing dishes. At one point, Gabriel's fork slipped from his fingers. Clarissa didn't so much as glance up, still scrolling through her phone. But Elena crossed the room instantly, picking it up, her eyes meeting Gabriel's with quiet understanding. That single gesture, small, unseen by Clarissa, felt more intimate than anything his fiancée had done in weeks. And Gabriel knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that his heart was shifting. That night, long after Clarissa had fallen asleep beside him, Gabriel lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about Elena's steady hands, her soft words, her invisible presence that somehow felt louder than Clarissa's entire existence. His plan had been to test one woman's love. Instead, another woman had begun to show him what love truly looked like. And though he couldn't admit it yet, even to himself, Gabriel felt the spark that would change everything. If you were Gabriel, what would you do right now? Keep the lie going until Clarissa fully exposes herself? Or stop and risk losing the chance to see Elena's truth? Comment below with your choice. The storm broke on a Wednesday evening. Clarissa returned from another afternoon with friends, irritation written across her face as she tossed her purse onto the couch. Gabriel was waiting in the living room, his wheelchair angled toward the fire. He had spent the day wrestling with the heaviness in his chest, waiting for her to return, desperate, against his better judgment. For something, anything, that would feel like love. "You're home late," he said quietly. Clarissa rolled her eyes. "Don't start. I was networking. You know how important that is." "Networking," Gabriel repeated, his voice flat. She poured herself a glass of wine, not offering him any. "Yes, networking. You think those investors just fall into our laps? Someone has to keep appearances up." "Appearances?" Gabriel echoed again, sharper this time. "Is that all this is to you? An appearance?" Clarissa froze mid-sip, her eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Gabriel said slowly, his voice trembling with contained fury, "that since the day the doctors told me I wouldn't walk again, you've been drifting further away. You treat me like a burden, Clarissa, like dead weight. Tell me, what are you still here for?" The silence that followed was deafening. Clarissa set the glass down with a sharp clink. "You're being cruel," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how hard this is on me? I didn't sign up to be a nurse. I'm young, Gabriel. I have a life ahead of me. I can't spend it tied to a chair and a man who refuses to live." The words slammed into him like a physical blow. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the arms of the chair. For a moment, he thought he might break down completely. And then, from the doorway, came the quiet sound of something falling. A tray, the clatter of dishes against marble. Both turned. Elena stood frozen, her face pale, her hands trembling as she stooped quickly to gather the shards of porcelain. Clarissa's eyes flashed with annoyance. "For heaven's sake, can't you do anything right?" But Gabriel saw it. He saw the anguish in Elena's eyes, the way she tried to hide it, the way her heart seemed to break for him when his fiancée's words had cut him to pieces. "Elena," Gabriel said softly. She straightened, clutching the broken pieces to her chest. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to intrude." Clarissa waved her hand dismissively. "Then don't." But Gabriel's gaze never left Elena. For the first time, he saw her not as part of the background but as the only person in the room who truly felt his pain. And in that moment, something inside him shattered. Later, long after Clarissa had stormed upstairs, Gabriel remained by the fire, his head bowed, his shoulders heavy with despair. He heard the soft sound of footsteps approach and stopped himself from speaking. Somehow, he already knew who it was. Elena appeared quietly, carrying a fresh cup of tea. She set it on the table beside him, her hands lingering for a second longer than usual. "You shouldn't have to hear things like that," Gabriel whispered, his voice breaking. Elena's eyes softened, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she crouched slightly, lowering herself to his level. "You shouldn't have to feel things like that," she said, her tone steady. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. No pretense, no masks, no roles of billionaire or maid. Just two souls, broken in different ways, finding something whole in the silence between them. Finally, Gabriel exhaled, a trembling breath that carried months, years, of buried pain. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Elena hesitated, then asked softly, "Do you mean this lie, or this life?" The question pierced deeper than anything Clarissa had ever said. Gabriel didn't answer. He couldn't. But the truth of both weighed heavy in his chest. Elena reached out, almost against her own better judgment, and laid her hand gently on his. It was the smallest touch, tentative and fleeting, but it burned warmer than any kiss Clarissa had ever given him. And in that fragile moment, Gabriel realized something terrifying and undeniable. The test was no longer about Clarissa. It was about Elena. Do you believe love is proven more in grand gestures, or in the quiet, everyday moments of care? Which one matters more to you? Let me know in the comments. The morning after the storm, the mansion was too quiet. Even the hum of the air system seemed muffled, as if the house itself knew something had broken inside it. Gabriel sat alone in the library, his wheelchair angled toward the shelves but his eyes unfocused. The fire from the night before had long since gone cold, leaving only gray ashes as a reminder of what had burned. He had hardly slept. Clarissa had returned to her side of the bed with a huff, falling asleep within minutes, while Gabriel lay staring at the ceiling, hearing Elena's words echo over and over. "You shouldn't have to feel things like that." He pressed his palms into the armrests of the chair until his knuckles ached. He had invited this pain, hadn't he? He had set this trap for Clarissa, determined to uncover the truth, but he hadn't accounted for his own weakness, his own longing for something real. And now, what frightened him most was that the something real had come from someone he wasn't supposed to notice at all. Elena kept her distance that morning. She polished the silver in silence, kept her gaze down when she passed the library doors, and left trays of food outside Gabriel's room instead of carrying them in herself. It wasn't that she didn't care. She cared too much for someone like her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she folded linens in the laundry room, the memory of Gabriel's hand beneath hers burning in her mind. She hadn't meant to touch him, hadn't meant to cross that invisible line between maid and master. But in that moment, she couldn't stop herself. Now, she replayed it over and over, torn between shame and something she refused to name. She had survived by being invisible, by keeping her head down, her heart locked away. If she let herself feel anything for Gabriel Lancaster, she would be opening a door that could destroy her. So she worked harder, moved faster, kept quieter. If she disappeared back into the background, perhaps the dangerous spark would fade. Clarissa, however, had no such hesitation. By midday, she had resumed her usual rhythm. On calls, scheduling lunches, planning a spa day. She entered the library briefly, dressed in a flowing silk blouse, her eyes already fixed on her tablet. "Gabriel, darling, I'll be gone most of the afternoon. You don't mind, do you? Gabriel's eyes flickered to her but quickly fell back to the book in his lap. Go wherever you want, Clarissa. You always do. She frowned, lowering the tablet for a moment. You don't have to be so bitter. I'm trying my best here. Are you? His voice was calm, but his eyes carried steel. Clarissa hesitated, her lips parting to respond, but she quickly snapped her mouth shut. With a forced smile, she leaned down and kissed the top of his head. I'll see you tonight. And then she was gone, leaving the scent of expensive perfume in her wake. Gabriel exhaled sharply, slamming the book shut. He wasn't sure how much longer he could endure this masquerade, his own and hers. That evening, Elena found herself in the kitchen longer than usual, slicing fruit she knew no one would eat, polishing counters that were already spotless. Anything to keep herself from walking into the library, where she knew Gabriel would be. But fate didn't give her the choice. Miss Cruz. Gabriel's voice came from the doorway, quiet but steady. She spun, startled, her hands tightening around the knife she held. He sat in his chair, watching her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. I didn't realize you were here, sir, she stammered. You've been avoiding me. Elena froze, guilt flashing across her face. I haven't. Yes, you have. His voice was soft, but there was no anger in it, only weariness. Why? Her throat worked, but the words wouldn't come. How could she tell him the truth? That she was terrified of what her heart was doing. That every time she saw the loneliness in his eyes, something inside her cracked open wider? Instead, she lowered her gaze. It isn't my place, sir. Not your place, Gabriel repeated, leaning back in his chair. His chest ached at the distance in her tone. She was right, of course. It wasn't her place. But still, he wanted it to be. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then go on. Don't let me keep you. Elena bowed her head, quickly setting down the knife and slipping past him, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Gabriel remained in the doorway, staring at the empty space where she had stood, his chest heavier than before. That night, Clarissa attended yet another dinner, leaving Gabriel to eat alone. He pushed the food around his plate, his appetite gone. When Elena came to clear the table, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt like a wall neither dared to cross. But as Elena carried the tray away, Gabriel whispered to himself, too softly for her to hear, I'm losing myself. And perhaps he was. Do you think Elena is right to resist her feelings because of her place? Or should love ignore all social lines? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. The days that followed turned the mansion into a stage of silence. Gabriel buried himself in work, or at least the pretense of it. His study became a fortress where he took endless calls, typed unnecessary emails, and stared at contracts he had no intention of signing. He was too sharp to let his empire collapse, but too distracted to move it forward. Whenever Clarissa floated in and out, chattering about luncheons or fittings, Gabriel offered only nods and clipped answers. When she pressed him, he waved her off with a cool, I'm fine. It wasn't true, but it was easier than admitting he was unraveling. Elena noticed, of course. She always did, but she too had drawn a line. She no longer lingered by the library door. She no longer offered tea at odd hours or dared to touch his hand. She moved through her duties with precision, polishing, dusting, arranging, her face carefully composed. Yet she couldn't erase the ache in her chest. Every time she saw him bent over his desk, his shoulders slumped with invisible weight, her hands itched to reach out, to do something, anything, to remind him he wasn't alone. But she reminded herself sternly, you are the maid, nothing more. At night, lying in her small room at the edge of the servants' quarters, Elena stared at the ceiling, hearing the echo of his voice. You've been avoiding me. And she whispered into the dark, because I have to. Clarissa, on the other hand, did not resist. She leaned into her own desires, which had little to do with Gabriel anymore. At dinner one evening, she breezed in late, draped in a glittering gown, her perfume heavy enough to fill the room. Gabriel sat at the table already, the untouched meal in front of him. "You're late," he said flatly. She laughed, dismissing him with a wave. "Oh, darling, I lost track of time. The girls and I went for cocktails after shopping. You know how it is." "No," Gabriel replied coldly. "I don't." Clarissa arched a brow. "Don't start. I'm doing my best to keep us in good standing. People are talking, Gabriel. They want to know what's happening with you. And it doesn't look good for me to sit around at home all day." His jaw tightened. "So your reputation matters more than being here for me?" "Oh, for God's sake," she snapped, slamming her clutch onto the table. "Stop making me the villain. Do you think it's easy watching you like this? You're not the man I agreed to marry. You're diminished." The words sliced through him. Before he could answer, Elena stepped forward quietly to clear a plate. Clarissa's head whipped toward her. "And you? Why are you standing there listening? Do your job and go." Elena lowered her gaze, murmured an apology, and slipped out, but not before Gabriel caught the flicker of pain in her eyes. When the door closed, Gabriel turned back to Clarissa, his voice low and edged with steel. "Be careful how you speak to her." Clarissa scoffed. "Since when do you care what the maid thinks?" Gabriel didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. That night, Elena sat in the kitchen long after the dishes were done, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had grown used to Clarissa's sharp tongue, but tonight, Gabriel's defense of her echoed louder than any insult. "Be careful how you speak to her." It was dangerous. Dangerous to let hope bloom where it had no right. And yet, no matter how hard she tried, Elena couldn't quiet the warmth that spread through her chest at the memory. Gabriel, in his room, stared at the ceiling again. He could hear Clarissa in the adjoining bathroom, humming as she applied her nightly creams, unconcerned, unbothered. His mind, however, was not on her. It was on Elena, the way her eyes had dropped, the way her voice had trembled, the way she carried dignity even when treated as invisible. He rolled onto his side, closing his eyes. But sleep didn't come. Only the image of Elena's hand on his, and the ache of knowing he couldn't reach for it again. Not yet. Not while pride still caged his heart. If you were in Elena's place, feeling something for someone so far above your station, would you keep your distance like she does, or take the risk of speaking the truth? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments. Rain poured the next evening, slamming against the tall windows of the mansion. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm inside Gabriel's chest. Clarissa had grown restless. The weather ruined her plans for dinner in the city, and being confined to the mansion left her irritated and short-tempered. She paced the living room with a glass of wine, her heels striking the marble like small explosions. "Why must it always feel like a hospital in here?" she snapped, throwing herself onto the couch. "So dreary, so suffocating. I can't breathe in this mausoleum." Gabriel sat near the fire, his hands folded in his lap. "It's not the house that feels suffocating, Clarissa." Her eyes narrowed. "Meaning what?" "Meaning maybe the problem isn't the walls. Maybe it's what's inside them." She scoffed, sipping her wine. "You've become impossible, Gabriel. Brooding, bitter, accusing me of things I haven't done. Do you want me to be miserable with you? Is that it?" He opened his mouth, but the words tangled in his throat. He wanted to scream, to reveal the truth, that this paralysis was a lie, that it had all been a test. But shame stopped him. If he confessed now, what would remain? The test had failed. He had failed. So instead, he said nothing. The silence stretched until Clarissa threw her head back with a groan. "I can't live like this. I won't." Elena had been standing in the doorway unnoticed, carrying a tray with tea. At Clarissa's words, she froze, her chest tightening. She couldn't move, couldn't step in, but she couldn't leave either. Gabriel's voice, when it came, was low. "Then maybe you shouldn't." The air snapped like a whip. Clarissa set her glass down sharply, rising from the couch. "Careful, Gabriel. Don't push me too far." He looked up at her, his eyes hollow. "I don't have to. You're already halfway out the door." Clarissa's lips curved into a cold smile. "Perhaps I am. She stormed from the room, her heels echoing against marble until the sound vanished upstairs. Gabriel sat motionless, his chest heaving with anger and despair. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the storm in his eyes. And that was when he noticed Elena, still frozen in the doorway. Their gazes locked. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Gabriel's voice broke the silence, softer than she had ever heard it. "You shouldn't have to witness this." Elena stepped forward slowly, setting the tray down on the table beside him. "And you shouldn't have to endure it alone." He closed his eyes, his throat tightening. "But I am alone." Elena hesitated, her hand hovering as if to reach for him, but she stopped herself just short. "No," she whispered. "You're not." The storm outside thundered, rattling the windows, but inside the mansion, a different kind of storm was brewing. One made not of rage, but of longing, unspoken and undeniable. Gabriel wanted to reach out, to break his own chains of pride and let the truth spill free. But fear held him back. Fear of what she would think if she knew his deception. Fear of the fragile hope in her eyes. So he turned away, retreating back into silence. And Elena, sensing the wall still standing between them, lowered her gaze and stepped back into the shadows where she had always lived. But neither of them could unhear the words that had been spoken. That night, as Clarissa slept soundly in the master suite, Gabriel sat awake in his chair by the window, watching the rain. His reflection stared back at him. A man trapped not by paralysis, but by his own pride. And in another corner of the house, Elena lay awake in her narrow bed, her heart aching with a truth she dared not voice. They were two souls resisting the pull that had already begun to bind them. But the resistance could not last forever. If you were Gabriel, would you confess the truth about your fake paralysis now, even if it meant losing both women? Or would you keep the lie going to protect yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to see where you stand. Gabriel is suffocating under the weight of his deception. Elena has quietly but unmistakably stepped closer, even as both resist what's growing. The storm that had rattled the mansion the night before left its mark. Fallen branches littered the driveway, and the power flickered on and off throughout the morning. The household staff worked quickly to restore order, but the damage was clear. The Lancaster estate, for all its wealth and grandeur, was not invincible. Neither, Gabriel realized, was he. He awoke with a splitting headache, the remnants of a sleepless night heavy in his skull. Clarissa had left early, breezing out with a hurried, "I'll be at the spa. Don't wait up." He barely had the energy to nod in response. By noon, his headache had worsened. The power went out entirely, leaving the mansion eerily quiet. For the first time, Gabriel found himself truly vulnerable. Without the elevator, without the electrical systems that supported his chair, he was stranded on the ground floor. Elena discovered him in the library, his skin pale, his hands trembling as he tried to rub away the pain in his temples. "Mr. Lancaster?" Her voice was soft but urgent. She crossed the room quickly. "You don't look well." Gabriel gave a hollow laugh. "I feel worse." She crouched beside him, her brow furrowed. "You need to rest. Come. I'll help you to the sofa." "I can manage," he began, but the words faltered as his body betrayed him. The truth was, he couldn't manage. Not like this. Elena slipped her arm beneath his, steadying him with surprising strength. "Please," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Let me." For a moment, Gabriel resisted. Pride clawed at him, insisting he could hold on. But his body sagged, and he finally let himself lean into her. The sensation startled him. Her presence was steady, warm, grounding. Not pitying, not hesitant, just there. When she lowered him onto the sofa, Gabriel exhaled deeply, as though releasing more than just the tension in his muscles. "Better?" she asked gently. He nodded, closing his eyes. "A little." Elena hesitated, then pulled the blanket from the arm of the sofa and draped it over him. Her fingers brushed against his as she tucked it in, sending an uninvited spark through both of them. Gabriel's eyes opened slowly, meeting hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Elena looked away, busying herself with the tray she had brought. "I'll make tea, it helps with headaches. My grandmother always said so." Gabriel's lips curved faintly. "I trust your grandmother." As the afternoon wore on, the storm's aftermath kept Clarissa away, traffic blocking the roads leading back to the estate. Hours stretched, and Elena remained nearby, quietly tending to Gabriel. She readjusted the blanket when it slipped. She refilled his glass of water without being asked. She sat near the sofa, not speaking much, but not leaving either. At one point, Gabriel stirred, opening his eyes to find her bent over a book, the firelight casting a golden glow on her face. "You read?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Elena looked up, startled. "When I can. Mostly borrowed books." "What do you read?" She hesitated, almost shy. "Stories. About people who survive impossible things." Gabriel studied her, his chest tightening. "Fitting." A small smile tugged at her lips. "Perhaps." Their eyes lingered on each other, the silence between them no longer heavy but strangely comforting. By evening, Gabriel's headache had dulled, though his body still felt weak. Elena prepared a simple meal by candlelight. The power still hadn't returned, and insisted he eat. "You'll feel worse if you don't," she said firmly, sliding the tray onto his lap. Gabriel chuckled softly. "You're rather bossy for a maid." Elena flushed, ducking her head. "I'm sorry, sir." "No," he shook his head, smiling faintly. "Don't apologize. It's refreshing." Her eyes flickered to his, warmth blooming there before she quickly looked away. They ate in silence, but the air between them felt different now, lighter, less restrained. For the first time in weeks, Gabriel felt cared for. Not managed, not tolerated, but truly seen. And that terrified him, because the more he let himself lean on Elena, the harder it would be to keep pretending, both about his paralysis and about the boundaries between them. Do you think Gabriel should keep resisting Elena's kindness out of pride? Or allow himself to lean on her even if it risks exposing the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. The storm refused to relent. By nightfall, the power remained out, leaving the mansion bathed in candlelight. Shadows danced along the walls, softening the sharp edges of marble and steel, turning the vast estate into something almost intimate. Gabriel sat on the sofa, still wrapped in the blanket Elena had given him. His body felt weaker than usual, but his mind was restless. He watched the flicker of flames in the fireplace, listening to the occasional groan of the house against the storm. Elena moved quietly through the room, placing candles in tall holders, her presence as steady as the light she carried. When she turned toward him, Gabriel found himself staring, not just at her movements, but at the calm strength she carried, the grace of someone who had learned to survive storms far greater than this one. "You should rest," she said gently. "I can't," Gabriel admitted. "My thoughts are louder than the thunder." Elena hesitated, then set the last candle down and crossed the room. Instead of disappearing, she sat in the armchair opposite him, folding her hands in her lap. "Would it help to speak them?" she asked quietly. Gabriel studied her, the words caught in his throat. Clarissa had never asked such a question. No one had, not since his mother had passed, not since his father's cold empire had consumed their lives. And yet, here was Elena, offering nothing more than presence. He sighed, leaning back into the cushions. "I don't even know where to begin." "Begin anywhere," she said. His gaze dropped to the fire. "Do you ever feel trapped in a life you built yourself? As if every decision you made was supposed to give you freedom, but instead it's left you in chains?" Elena's expression softened. "Yes." Her answer startled him. He looked up and she held his gaze steadily. "I was 16 when my father left," she said, her voice calm but threaded with memory. "My mother worked herself sick to keep us fed. I thought if I worked harder, if I stayed invisible, I could make life easier for her. And I did for a while. But then she was gone, and I realized I had built my life around being useful, not being alive." Gabriel's chest tightened. He hadn't expected her to give him something so raw. You asked if I know what it feels like to be trapped. She continued. I do. I live it. Every day. The fire cracked softly between them. For the first time, Gabriel felt the barrier between them thin. Elena. He paused, his voice rough. You deserve more. She smiled faintly, a sad curve of her lips. Perhaps. But some of us don't get more, Mr. Lancaster. We just keep going. The way she said it, without bitterness, only quiet acceptance, hit him harder than Clarissa's sharpest words. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. Maybe you've been invisible to others, but not to me. Not anymore. The silence that followed was thick, charged. Elena's breath caught, her hands tightening against her lap. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. The storm raged outside, but inside the mansion, something else raged. Something both of them had fought to resist, now pressing closer. Finally, Elena stood, breaking the moment. You should sleep. I'll stay nearby in case you need anything. Gabriel's chest ached with the urge to stop her, to ask her to stay, but pride held his tongue. So he only nodded, watching her retreat into the shadows once again. But long after she had gone, her words and her presence lingered like a flame he could not put out. What do you think is stronger in this moment? Gabriel's pride, or the pull of his feelings for Elena? And which one do you think will win? Share in the comments. I'm curious where you stand. The storm showed no mercy that night. The winds howled like an angry chorus, rattling the shutters and bending the trees outside. The mansion felt less like a fortress and more like a fragile vessel being tested. Gabriel had managed to doze off on the sofa, but the weakness in his body lingered, pressing down like a weight he couldn't shake. The fire burned low, casting only embers now. Elena checked on him quietly, tiptoeing into the room with another blanket draped over her arm. She paused when she saw his head slumped forward, his breathing uneven. Mr. Lancaster? She whispered. No response. Concern flooded her. She set the blanket down and touched his shoulder gently. Gabriel. At her touch, his eyes fluttered open, glassy with fatigue. I'm fine, he murmured, though his pallor betrayed him. You're not fine, Elena said firmly. You're pale, and you're burning up. He gave a faint, humorless chuckle. Maybe I deserve it. Her chest tightened at the defeat in his voice. Without thinking, she pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. The heat confirmed her fear. You have a fever, she whispered. I'll live. Not if you keep pretending you don't need anyone. Elena shot back, her tone sharper than she intended. Gabriel blinked, startled by her sudden fierceness. For a moment, silence fell, the storm filling the space between them. Then Gabriel let out a weak laugh, almost bitter. You sound like my mother. She used to say the same thing. Elena softened, her hand still lingering near his. Maybe she was right. When Gabriel swayed, Elena acted quickly, slipping an arm around him. Come, you can't stay here. You need to rest properly. He resisted, his pride flaring. I don't need. But his voice broke as his strength gave way. His body leaned heavily against hers, and this time he didn't pull back. Step by step, Elena guided him to the guest bedroom on the ground floor. Her movements were steady, strong, far more capable than her slender frame suggested. She helped him onto the bed, adjusting the pillows, tucking the blanket firmly around him. When she tried to step back, his hand caught hers. Elena. His voice was low, strained. She froze. Yes, sir. Stay. The word was more plea than command. Her heart pounded. She knew she should refuse, that the line between them was already blurring dangerously. But when she looked into his tired eyes stripped of all pride and walls, she couldn't walk away. So she pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat. For a long while, Gabriel simply watched her, his breathing uneven but calmer. You shouldn't care this much, he whispered. Maybe not, Elena admitted softly. But I do. The confession hung in the air, fragile and real. Gabriel closed his eyes, not because he wanted to shut her out, but because the truth in her words threatened to undo him completely. And as the storm raged on outside, inside the quiet guest room, two hearts sat closer than either dared to admit. Do you think Elena made the right choice by staying with Gabriel that night, even if it risks her heart? Or should she have walked away to protect herself? Share your view in the comments. The storm had passed by morning, but its echo lingered, fallen branches across the lawn, puddles pooling in the gravel driveway, and the soft, damp air seeping through the windows. Inside, however, the mansion felt strangely hushed, as though holding its breath. Elena hadn't left the chair beside Gabriel's bed all night. She'd fought sleep, jerking awake each time her eyes grew heavy, only to check on him again. His fever had broken near dawn, his breathing evening out into the steady rhythm of rest. When he stirred, she straightened instantly. "Good morning," she said softly. Gabriel blinked, disoriented at first. His gaze landed on her, surprise flickering there. "You stayed. I said I would." He exhaled, his lips curving faintly. "You're stubborn. You needed someone?" Elena replied simply, her tone more matter-of-fact than emotional. Gabriel studied her, his expression unreadable. "No one's ever stayed like that. Not for me." The admission slipped out unguarded. He hadn't planned to reveal it, but fatigue had stripped away his defenses. Elena tilted her head, curiosity softening her features. "Not even when you were younger? Your parents?" His gaze shifted to the ceiling, his jaw tightening. "My father was a machine. Work, numbers, expectations. If I didn't meet them, I wasn't worth his time. My mother, she tried, but she was fragile. Too fragile. I learned early that needing anyone was a mistake." The bitterness in his voice was edged with grief, and Elena felt it cut through her chest. "I'm sorry," she murmured. Gabriel gave a humorless laugh. "Don't be. It made me who I am. It taught me to build walls so high no one could climb them." Elena hesitated, then asked gently, "And does it feel safe, behind those walls?" His eyes flicked to hers, sharp but vulnerable. "It feels empty." The room stilled at his confession. The crack in his armor was small, but it was there, and Elena saw it. She lowered her gaze, fingers fidgeting with the hem of her skirt. "I know what that's like." Gabriel leaned slightly toward her, curiosity piqued. "Tell me." Elena hesitated. Her past wasn't something she shared. She had spent years keeping it tucked away, invisible like herself. But the way Gabriel looked at her, expectant yes but not demanding, gave her courage. "My father left when I was 16, she began softly. "One day he was there, the next he wasn't. He left debts, anger, and my mother, who worked herself to death trying to make up for his absence. I tried to help, but it was never enough. When she passed, it was just me. I thought if I kept working, kept my head down, I'd survive. That's how I ended up here." Gabriel's brows furrowed, his usual sharpness replaced by something gentler. "You've carried all that alone." Elena shrugged lightly, though her eyes betrayed the weight of it. "What choice did I have?" For a long moment, Gabriel didn't respond. He simply looked at her as though seeing her anew. Not as a maid, not as someone beneath him, but as a woman who had endured storms greater than his wealth could ever shield him from. "You deserved better," he said quietly. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had long stopped wishing for better, long stopped believing she deserved anything at all. To hear it now, from him, stirred something deep inside her. She forced a small smile. "Maybe, but life doesn't always give us what we deserve." Gabriel's eyes softened, and for the first time, he reached across the small space, his hand brushing lightly against hers. "Then maybe it's time it did." The touch was fleeting, but it left Elena breathless. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew something had shifted. Do you believe people can truly heal from past wounds when they find someone willing to stay? Or do you think the past always leaves scars too deep to overcome? Share your thoughts in the comments. Later that afternoon, the household began to stir again. Staff moved quietly, clearing storm debris from the drive, relighting rooms as the electricity finally returned. Yet inside Gabriel's study, the air was different, thicker, almost intimate. Elena had brought in fresh linens and was straightening the shelves when Gabriel's voice broke the silence. "You're not required to stay, you know?" She glanced back, pausing. "Do you want me to leave?" His gaze lingered on her a beat too long before he looked away. "No." Something in his tone, low, almost reluctant, sent a warmth rushing through her chest. She smiled faintly, turning back to her task. As she reached for a stack of books, one slipped, tumbling to the floor with a dull thud. When she bent to pick it up, a folded photograph slid out from between the pages. She froze. The photo was worn, the edges curled, but the image was clear. A young boy with unruly dark hair, holding his mother's hand in a sunlit garden. The boy's smile was wide, unguarded, nothing like the Gabriel she knew now. Before she could tuck it back, Gabriel's voice came sharp. "Where did you find that?" Elena turned, startled by the tension in his face. "It fell out of the book. I didn't mean. Give it to me." His tone was clipped, commanding, but beneath it Elena heard something else. Fear. She hesitated, then stepped forward, holding the photo out. Gabriel took it quickly, his hand trembling slightly as he gripped the worn edges. Silence pressed in. His jaw worked as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Finally, Elena spoke softly. "She looks kind." Gabriel's head jerked up, surprise flashing across his features. "You saw her?" Elena nodded gently. "Your mother?" He exhaled, the fight draining out of him. "Yes, she was everything. Gentle. Too gentle for the world my father forced her into." His voice grew hoarse. "She used to tell me love was worth everything. That no matter how much it hurt, you had to believe in it. But then she was gone, and all I had left was a father who called love a weakness." Elena's chest ached at the rawness in his words. "Do you believe her?" she asked quietly. Gabriel stared at the photo, his thumb brushing the faded image. "I don't know. I want to. But every time I've trusted someone, every time I've thought love could be real, it's turned out to be a lie." His lips curled bitterly. "Maybe my father was right." Elena stepped closer, her voice trembling but sure. "No, he wasn't." Gabriel looked up, startled by the conviction in her tone. Elena swallowed hard, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "Love isn't weakness. It's the opposite. To love, to stay, to fight for someone. That takes more strength than leaving ever will." Her words hung heavy in the air, striking him in a place he hadn't let anyone touch in years. He wanted to argue, to dismiss her as naive, but the fire in her eyes silenced him. She wasn't speaking theory. She was speaking truth, born of loss, born of survival. And for the first time in years, Gabriel wondered if maybe, just maybe, his mother had been right after all. Do you agree with Gabriel's father that love makes us weak, or with Elena, that love is the greatest strength we can have? Tell me in the comments where you stand. The study grew quiet again after Gabriel tucked the photograph back into the book, his expression unreadable. Elena moved to the side table, collecting the empty teacup, when Gabriel's voice stopped her. "Elena," he said slowly, "you've told me about your father leaving, about your mother. But there's more, isn't there?" She froze, her fingers tightening around the porcelain cup. "You carry yourself like someone who's always waiting for the world to fall apart," Gabriel continued, his tone gentle, not accusing. "That doesn't come from just loss. It comes from being left behind too many times." Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to deflect, to retreat into silence. But something in his gaze, open, searching, almost pleading, unraveled her defenses. She set the cup down with trembling hands. "After my mother died, I worked wherever I could, cleaning houses, waiting tables, sleeping on couches when I couldn't afford rent. People were kind, until they weren't. Promises were made, then broken. I learned quickly that when people say, 'I'll help you,' they usually mean, 'until it costs me too much.'" Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "I've been invisible so long, Gabriel, that sometimes I wonder if I even exist outside of the work I do. If I stopped cleaning, cooking, serving, Would anyone even notice I was gone? The confession spilled out like a wound she had kept bandaged too tightly, now aching with release. Gabriel's chest tightened. He wanted to reach across the desk, to take her hands in his, to tell her he noticed, that he saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. But the words lodged in his throat, choked by the enormity of what he felt. Instead, he asked quietly, "Do you believe that? That no one would notice?" Elena hesitated. "Most days, yes." Gabriel leaned forward, his voice firm, almost fierce. "Then you're wrong. I would notice. More than you know." The air between them pulsed with something raw and undeniable. Elena's breath caught, her eyes locking with his. For a moment, time seemed to still, the storm outside replaced by the storm inside them both. Then footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. Elena stepped back quickly, the spell broken. "I should finish the linens," she said softly, retreating toward the door. Gabriel watched her go, frustration and longing warring inside him. He had seen her now, truly seen her, and there was no going back. And as the door closed behind her, one truth burned in his chest. Elena was no longer invisible. Not to him, not ever again. Do you think Elena was right to share her hidden pain with Gabriel? Or should she have protected herself by keeping the walls up? Share your perspective in the comments. The days that followed felt different. The storm had passed, the estate slowly returned to its pristine order, and Clarissa resumed her comings and goings with little notice of Gabriel's lingering weakness. But beneath the polished surface, something had shifted. Gabriel found himself seeking Elena's presence more often. It wasn't intentional at first, just subtle, quiet moments. A cup of tea left beside his desk, the faint sound of her humming as she worked in the kitchen, the soft rustle of her skirts as she moved through the hall. Each time his chest tightened. He told himself it was curiosity, gratitude, but he knew better. One afternoon, Gabriel wheeled himself into the garden. The air was crisp, the scent of wet earth lingering after the storm. Elena was already there, kneeling by the rose bushes, her hands gently brushing soil from their leaves. She looked up, startled. "Mr. Lancaster, I didn't expect you." "Gabriel," he corrected softly. Her cheeks flushed faintly, but she nodded. "Gabriel." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the rustle of leaves. Then Gabriel gestured to the roses. "You take care of them." Elena smiled faintly. "They're temperamental. They bloom beautifully, but only if you're patient. If you neglect them, they wither quickly." Gabriel studied her, his voice low. Like people, their eyes met, and the weight of unspoken meaning passed between them. Elena looked away first, brushing her hands against her apron. "Would you like me to cut some for the house?" "Yes," Gabriel said. Then, after a pause, "But leave a few. I like knowing they're still out here, alive." Her lips curved into a soft smile. "As you wish." Later that evening, Elena carried a small vase of roses into his study. She set them on the desk, the crimson blooms bright against the dark wood. Gabriel watched her, his heart thudding harder than it should. "You make this place feel less empty," he admitted quietly. Elena froze, then turned slowly. "It's your home. It should never feel empty." "It's full of things," Gabriel said, gesturing around the vast room. "But things don't make it alive. People do. And most people here," his voice faltered, "most people are only here because of what I can give them." Elena's gaze softened. "And what about me?" The question hung in the air, bold and trembling. Gabriel's throat tightened. He searched her face, wanting desperately to believe what he saw there. Genuine care, not expectation. But his old fears clawed at him. "I don't know," he admitted, "and that terrifies me." Elena stepped closer, her hands clasped before her. "Then let me prove it. Not with words, with presence." The simplicity of her promise shook him. No one had ever offered him something so small and yet so enormous. For the first time in years, Gabriel smiled. Not the practiced smirk he wore in boardrooms, but a real, unguarded smile. "Stay then," he said softly. And she did. That night, After the staff had retired, Gabriel and Elena found themselves in the library. He had asked her to read to him, something he hadn't done since childhood. She hesitated at first, but when he insisted, she chose a book at random from the shelves. Her voice filled the room, low and steady, weaving the words into life. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, his eyes closed, simply listening. It struck him how comforting it was. Not the story itself, but her voice, her nearness, the steady rhythm of her presence. At one point, she stumbled over a word, and Gabriel chuckled softly. Elena glanced up, flustered. "I'm not very good at reading aloud." "You're perfect," Gabriel murmured without thinking. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Elena's cheeks burned, and she ducked her head, continuing to read. But her hands trembled slightly as she turned the page. Gabriel watched her, his heart aching with something he could no longer deny. Do you think Gabriel is finally ready to open his heart to Elena? Or is he still too afraid of being hurt again? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. The following afternoon, the mansion bustled with preparations for a dinner party Clarissa had planned weeks prior. Staff hurried through the halls, setting silverware, arranging flowers, polishing every surface until it gleamed. Gabriel sat near the grand piano in the drawing room, watching absently as the flurry of activity unfolded. His body still ached from the storm's toll, but it wasn't exhaustion that held his thoughts. It was Elena. He spotted her at the far end of the room, adjusting candles on the long table. Her hair slipped loose from its pins, brushing her cheek as she reached up. Something about the simple, unguarded moment tugged at him. "Careful," he called softly. "Those candelabras are older than you." Elena turned, startled, then caught the faint smile tugging at his lips. "So you're saying they belong in a museum, not on a dinner table?" His smirk widened. "Exactly. I'd rather not have my ancestors' antique scorched because you're clumsy." Her brows arched, her eyes glinting. "Clumsy? I'll have you know I balance tea trays through narrow hallways better than anyone here." "Impressive," Gabriel replied, feigning solemnity. "A dangerous skill. One misstep and it's a tragedy." For the first time, Elena laughed. Bright, unrestrained, utterly disarming. Gabriel's chest tightened at the sound. He hadn't realized how starved he was for it. She caught herself, her cheeks coloring. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't." "Don't," Gabriel interrupted, his voice softer than he intended. "Don't apologize for that." The air shifted between them, fragile but warm. Later, when the guests had arrived and the rooms were filled with chatter and clinking glasses, Gabriel withdrew early, feigning fatigue. Clarissa, radiant in silk, barely noticed. Elena found him on the balcony outside his study, the night air cool against his face. He looked up when she stepped through the door, carrying a small plate of food. "You didn't eat," she said, setting the plate on the table beside him. "I wasn't hungry." "Then eat anyway." Her tone was firm but kind, the same gentle authority she had shown during the storm. Gabriel chuckled, shaking his head. "You do realize you're the only person who dares speak to me like that?" Elena met his gaze steadily. "Maybe that's why you let me stay." The words struck him deeper than he expected. He leaned back in his chair, studying her in the moonlight. "You're not afraid of me?" "No," Elena said simply. "Why not?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Because beneath all this," she gestured vaguely at the mansion, "the wealth, the armor he wore, you're just a man who's lonely." The honesty of her words silenced him. Gabriel swallowed hard, then asked quietly, "And if I am? Then you don't have to be," Elena whispered. For a long moment, the world around them faded. The laughter from inside, the glittering lights of the party, the weight of roles and titles. It was just the two of them, standing at the edge of something neither dared to name, but both felt. And for the first time, Gabriel let himself hope. Do you think Elena is right, that Gabriel is really just a lonely man beneath the armor of wealth? Or is there more to him than even she can see yet? Share your perspective in the comments. The house was quiet long after the party ended. Guests had departed in carriages and sleek black cars, their laughter fading into the night. Clarissa had left too, swept off by friends to a private afterparty downtown. Gabriel, however, remained in the library. The room smelled faintly of smoke and roses, the remnants of the evening's warmth. He sat by the piano, his fingers tracing the polished keys though he hadn't touched them in years. Elena appeared in the doorway, her steps hesitant. "You're still awake." "So are you," Gabriel replied softly. She stepped into the room, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. "I was clearing the last of the dishes. It's easier when no one's around." Gabriel nodded absently, his gaze drifting back to the piano. "You play?" she asked after a pause. "Not anymore," Gabriel said. "Why not?" His jaw tightened. "Because it reminds me of her." Elena's brow furrowed. "Your mother?" He nodded. "She used to sit here with me, said music was a language no one could lie in. After she died, I couldn't bear to touch it." The silence that followed was heavy, but Elena didn't step away. Instead, she moved closer, her voice gentle. "Then maybe you don't have to play for her memory. Maybe you could play for yourself." Gabriel gave a humorless laugh. "I wouldn't even know where to begin." Elena's eyes softened. Without thinking, she sat on the bench beside him, her skirt brushing against his arm. "Begin anywhere." For a moment, Gabriel didn't move. Then, hesitantly, he pressed a single key. The note rang out low and haunting. Another followed, then another, until the melody of an old lullaby began to emerge. His hands trembled, but the sound was pure, filling the room like a ghost returning home. Elena listened, her chest tightening. She had never seen him like this, unguarded, fragile, almost childlike in his vulnerability. When the melody faltered, her hand slid gently over his. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Gabriel looked at her, his heart thundering. The way she said it, the sincerity, the warmth, felt like balm to an old wound. Their eyes locked, and the air thickened. His hand remained beneath hers, neither pulling away. For one breathless moment, it seemed the world had narrowed to just this. The music lingering in the air, her hand resting on his, and the unspoken truth burning between them. Then Elena pulled back suddenly, her cheeks flushed. "It's late. You should rest." Gabriel's throat tightened, the words he wanted to say trapped behind pride and fear. But as she rose to leave, he whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Thank you for staying." Elena paused in the doorway, her back to him. A small, trembling smile curved her lips. "Always," she said, and with that, she slipped away, leaving Gabriel alone with the piano, and with a heart that no longer felt quite as lonely. Do you think Gabriel and Elena are already in love, even if they haven't said it out loud yet? Or is it still just the beginning of something deeper? Tell me in the comments what you think. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the breakfast room, gilding the silverware Clarissa had left scattered after her late-night return. Gabriel sat at the head of the table, a cup of coffee untouched before him. His eyes were shadowed, his mind restless. Elena moved quietly, gathering the plates. Her presence, once comforting, now unsettled him. Not because of her, but because of how much she had come to mean. The night at the piano still burned in his memory. Her hand on his, the warmth in her voice, terrified him. He couldn't afford to be wrong again. Not after Clarissa, not after years of guarding himself. Clarissa breezed into the room then, silk robe tied loosely, her smile sharp as glass. "Darling," she purred, leaning down to press a perfunctory kiss on Gabriel's cheek. He stiffened but didn't pull away. "Sleep well?" he asked flatly. "Like a dream," she lied, sliding into the chair beside him. Her eyes flicked to Elena, lingering just a little too long. A glint of mischief or malice lit her gaze. "Elena," Clarissa said sweetly, "I'd like a word with you, alone." Elena froze, glancing at Gabriel. His brow furrowed, but he gave a small nod. Reluctantly, she followed Clarissa out into the hall. The moment they were out of earshot, Clarissa's smile dropped. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "But it ends now." Elena blinked. I don't understand." "Oh, don't be coy," Clarissa snapped. "I've seen the way he looks at you, like some poor little maid has suddenly become his savior." She leaned in closer, her perfume cloying. "Do you think this will last? That a man like Gabriel Lancaster would ever choose you over me?" Elena's cheeks burned. You've never what? Wanted more? Dreamed of a life beyond scrubbing floors? Don't insult me, Elena. I know ambition when I see it. And trust me, darling, he'll see it too sooner or later. Then he'll throw you aside, just like the rest. Her words cut deep, sharper than Elena wanted to admit. But before she could respond, Clarissa pressed the knife further. "Why do you think he keeps you around? Pity, that's all. And when he tires of playing saint, you'll be out on the street again. Alone. Invisible." Elena's breath caught. She tried to summon the courage to deny it, but Clarissa's words struck too close to the fears she carried. Invisible. Replaceable. Clarissa smirked, satisfied at the silence. "Stay in your place, Elena, or I'll make sure you regret it." With that, she turned and swept back into the breakfast room, her smile perfectly intact. Elena stood frozen in the hallway, her chest aching. Invisible. Replaceable. The words echoed like a curse. Inside, Gabriel glanced up as Clarissa returned, her expression bright as though nothing had happened. "Where's Elena?" he asked. "She had chores," Clarissa said smoothly, sipping her coffee. "Honestly, darling, you spoil the help. No wonder she thinks she's indispensable." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. A seed of doubt had already been planted, one Clarissa knew exactly how to water. That evening, Gabriel wheeled himself toward the library, hoping to find Elena. He needed to see her, to feel again the certainty he had felt at the piano. Instead, he found her in the corridor, her eyes red as though she had been crying. "Elena?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. She quickly turned away, busying herself with a tray of folded linens. "I'm fine, Mr. Lancaster." "Gabriel," he corrected automatically. "What happened?" "Nothing," she said too quickly. He reached for her wrist, gently but firmly stopping her. "Elena, please, talk to me." Her gaze flicked to his, and for a heartbeat he thought she might. But then the doubt, the poison of Clarissa's words, flashed across her face. "You don't need to worry about me," she whispered. "I'm just the help." Gabriel's chest clenched. "Is that what you think?" "It's what everyone thinks," she said, pulling free. "And maybe they're right." Before he could stop her, she turned and walked away, leaving him staring after her with a hollow ache in his chest. That night, alone in his study, Gabriel poured himself a drink. The glass trembled in his hand. He had let himself believe, let himself hope. But Clarissa's words, Elena's retreat, his own gnawing fear, they all screamed the same truth: he was a fool to trust. And for the first time in weeks, the mansion felt empty again. Do you think Elena should have fought back against Clarissa's cruel words? Or was her silence the only thing she could do in that moment? Share your take in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. The following day dawned gray and heavy, clouds pressing low over the Lancaster estate. Gabriel rose early, restless. Sleep had eluded him, haunted by Elena's voice echoing in his mind. "I'm just the help." He wheeled himself to the breakfast room, but it was empty. Elena wasn't there to greet him, and the absence stung sharper than it should have. Clarissa appeared moments later, radiant in a cream dress that shimmered even in the muted light. She kissed his cheek lightly before sitting opposite him. "You look tired, darling," she observed sweetly. "Was the maid neglecting you again?" Gabriel's eyes narrowed. "Her name is Elena." Clarissa's smile faltered, then returned with practiced ease. "Of course, Elena. Forgive me. But really, Gabriel, don't you think you've given her far too much freedom?" "What do you mean?" Clarissa leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "The staff have been whispering. They say she spends more time in your study than in the servants' quarters." That she lingers when she should be working. Gabriel's stomach twisted. That's not true, isn't it? Clarissa's eyes gleamed. Even if it were harmless, appearances matter. You're a Lancaster. People watch you. They judge. She paused for effect. And they judge her too. Do you really want to be the reason she's ruined? Her words slithered into him, feeding his doubt. He opened his mouth to protest but found none came. Clarissa reached across the table, her hand brushing his. Darling, I know your heart is generous, but generosity can be dangerous when given to the wrong people. Elena, meanwhile, stood just outside the doorway, a tray balanced in her hands. She hadn't meant to overhear, but the voices carried. Ruined. The wrong people. Her chest tightened until she could hardly breathe. She turned swiftly, retreating down the corridor before either of them noticed her. Later that afternoon, Gabriel found her in the linen room, folding sheets with mechanical precision. Elena, he began. She didn't look up. Mr. Lancaster. The formality pierced him. Why are you avoiding me? I'm not. Yes, you are, he pressed, wheeling closer. Talk to me. Whatever Clarissa said. Elena stiffened. So you did hear something? Gabriel hesitated, the silence damning. Her hands trembled as she folded another sheet. She's right, isn't she? I don't belong here. People will talk. They'll ruin you and me with their whispers. Elena. She turned then, her eyes blazing with unshed tears. You don't understand. I've lived my whole life being tossed aside when I overstepped. One mistake, one wrong step, and it's gone, everything. I can't risk that again. The raw fear in her voice gutted him. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she wasn't just a servant, that he needed her more than he'd ever admit. But the words tangled with his own fears, Clarissa's insinuations, his father's warnings, his own doubts. So instead, he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and unforgiving. Finally, Elena shook her head. Maybe it's best if I keep my distance, for both our sakes. And with that, she brushed past him, leaving him in the linen room with a hollow ache spreading through his chest. That night, Gabriel sat alone in his study, a glass of brandy untouched on the desk. The roses Elena had brought him days ago had begun to wither, their petals drooping, color fading. He stared at them, his throat tight. Once they had felt like a promise. Now they looked like a warning. If you were in Elena's place, would you pull away to protect yourself, or fight for the fragile bond you'd built with Gabriel? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious how you see it. The following evening, Clarissa staged her performance. She invited a small group of friends to the estate. Gossips, socialites, people who thrived on whispers and half-truths. They gathered in the drawing room, their laughter sharp and shallow as champagne flowed. Gabriel endured it, seated near the fire, his expression unreadable. Elena entered quietly, balancing a tray of glasses. She moved between the guests with practiced grace, her head lowered, her presence almost invisible. Almost. Clarissa's voice sliced through the chatter. Elena, dear, she called sweetly. Come here a moment. Elena froze, then approached, setting the tray down carefully. Clarissa reached for her hand with exaggerated warmth. Everyone, Clarissa announced, her tone dripping with false affection. This is the young woman who's become quite indispensable to Gabriel. She glanced at him with a coy smile. Isn't that right, darling? Gabriel stiffened, sensing the trap. The guests chuckled knowingly. One of them, a sharp-eyed woman with diamonds glittering at her throat, leaned closer. Indispensable, you say? My, that's quite unusual for a maid. Elena's cheeks burned. She tried to pull her hand free, but Clarissa tightened her grip. Oh, it's more than unusual, Clarissa purred. Why, I sometimes wonder if Gabriel keeps her around for her company rather than her chores. The room erupted in laughter. Elena's breath hitched, shame flooding her chest. She looked to Gabriel, desperate for him to defend her, to say something, anything that would silence them. But Gabriel said nothing. His jaw clenched, his eyes dark with conflict, but the words would not come. Doubt and fear sealed his tongue, just as Clarissa had intended. The silence cut deeper than any insult. Tears blurred Elena's vision. With a sharp breath, she pulled free from Clarissa's grasp, setting the tray down with trembling hands. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice breaking. She fled the room, the laughter of the guests following her like knives. Gabriel sat frozen as the door closed behind her. His heart pounded, shame and fury warring within him. But the damage was done. His silence had spoken louder than any defense. Clarissa leaned back, sipping her champagne, her smile triumphant. Elena didn't stop until she reached the servants' quarters, her chest heaving. She pressed her back against the wall, sliding to the floor as tears spilled unchecked. She had dared to believe she mattered, that she was seen, that she was loved. But in the end, she was right all along. Invisible, replaceable, and utterly alone. In his study later that night, Gabriel stared at the dead roses still sitting on his desk. One by one, he plucked the petals and let them fall, each drop echoing the hollow in his chest. He had lost her, and worse, he had no one to blame but himself. Was Gabriel's silence unforgivable? Or do you think fear and doubt explain why he froze? Should Elena give him another chance, or walk away for good? Share your thoughts in the comments. The mansion was quieter than it had ever been. After the humiliation in the drawing room, laughter and champagne had long faded, leaving only shadows clinging to the halls. Elena kept to the servants' wing, avoiding Gabriel at all costs. She threw herself into work, scrubbing, polishing, mending, until her hands ached and her body sagged with exhaustion. But no amount of work silenced the ache in her chest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. The moment she had looked to him for protection, for affirmation, and found nothing but silence. You should have known better, she told herself. He's a Lancaster. You're just the help. But still, the memory of his smile at the piano, his voice when he said she made the house less empty, gnawed at her. She wanted to hate him, but her heart betrayed her, aching instead. Gabriel, meanwhile, had shut himself in his study. Days blurred together, measured only by the level of brandy in his glass. His reflection in the darkened window haunted him. The same proud, stubborn face he had once sworn would never bow to weakness. And yet, weakness was all he felt. He replayed the scene in the drawing room 100 times. Clarissa's taunts, the guests' laughter, Elena's eyes. Pleading, desperate, betrayed, and his own silence. He could still hear his father's voice, cold and scathing. Love is a liability. Sooner or later, they'll use it against you. Hadn't that been proven true? Clarissa had used his heart, his name, his wealth. Now Elena, sweet, fragile Elena, had been dragged into the same cruel web. But something gnawed at him, refusing to let him rest. Elena hadn't wanted his fortune. She had cared for him when she thought he had nothing. She had risked herself in the storm, sat by his side when no one else would. She was different, his heart whispered, and you let her believe she wasn't. The weight of his failure pressed down until it was almost unbearable. For years, Gabriel had prided himself on control, over his empire, his image, his life. But with Elena, control had slipped through his fingers. And for the first time, he wondered if losing control was exactly what he needed. That evening, the storm returned, lightning flickering at the horizon, rain pattering softly against the windows. Gabriel wheeled himself to the garden, where the roses still clung to life despite the season's chill. He stared at them, remembering Elena's words. They bloom beautifully, but only if you're patient. If you neglect them, they wither quickly. He reached out, brushing a trembling finger over a fading bloom. I neglected you, he whispered to the empty air. And now you're gone. The confession cracked something inside him. His chest heaved, his eyes burning, though tears rarely came. For a long time, he stayed there in the rain, caught between pride and longing. He knew what he wanted, but to reach for it meant risking the one thing he had built his life around: control. Inside, Elena sat in her small room, staring at the simple wooden cross her mother had left her. She held it tightly, as she had on the worst nights of her childhood, when she was certain she had no one left. "I was a fool," she whispered into the silence, "to think someone like him could ever see me." But even as she said it, another memory rose. His voice, fierce and unyielding, when he told her she was wrong to believe she'd go unnoticed. "I would notice," he had said, "more than you know." Her hands trembled around the cross. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that his silence in that room hadn't been rejection but fear. But did she dare risk being broken again? She pressed the cross to her lips, closing her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that love, real love, was worth the risk. Both sat alone that night, hearts heavy, the storm raging outside. Both knew the choice was theirs to make. Would they cling to pride and fear? Or would they take the terrifying step toward vulnerability and toward each other? If you were Gabriel or Elena, would you risk everything for love after such a painful betrayal? Or protect yourself by walking away? Comment your choice below. The storm grew heavier as the night wore on, rain hammering against the windows like an unrelenting drum. Gabriel sat at his desk, a half-written letter before him, ink smeared across the page, words crossed out and rewritten a dozen times. He had tried to write an apology, a confession, a plea, but every line felt inadequate, every word too small to capture the weight of what he had done and what he felt. At last, he shoved the paper aside, his hand trembling. Coward, he thought bitterly. He could face hostile boardrooms, ruthless negotiations, international scandals. But one woman's gaze had undone him completely. The truth clawed inside him, relentless. He wanted her, needed her, not as a maid, not as someone who filled the silence, but as the only person who had ever seen him without the armor and stayed. He wheeled himself back from the desk, his decision solidifying like steel. He couldn't let her believe she was invisible. Not again. Across the hall, Elena sat awake, her candle burning low. She had tried to pray, tried to still her aching heart, but peace refused to come. A soft knock startled her. She froze, unsure whether to answer. "Elena." Gabriel's voice came through the door, low and rough. Her breath caught. She rose slowly, heart pounding, and opened the door just enough to see him in the corridor. His hair was damp from the storm, his expression raw. "I needed to see you," he said simply. Elena's throat tightened. "Why?" Gabriel hesitated, pride warring with desperation. But then, for the first time, he let pride fall. "Because I was wrong," he said hoarsely. "Because I hurt you when all I wanted was to protect you. And because if I let you walk away, I'll lose the only thing in this house that feels real." Elena's eyes filled, her grip tightening on the doorframe. "You don't mean that." "I do." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "You see me, Elena. You've seen the parts one thought no one could ever look at again. And I see you. Not the maid, not the help, you." Her tears spilled over. For so long she had feared invisibility. Now, hearing those words, she felt more seen than ever before. But fear still lingered. What if it ends like before? What if you change your mind? Gabriel shook his head fiercely. "Then let it destroy me. But I'd rather risk being broken with you than live empty without you." The silence between them throbbed with possibility. Elena's hand trembled on the door, caught between slamming it shut or pulling it wide open. Her heart whispered what her pride resisted, that love was worth the risk. If you were Elena, would you trust Gabriel's confession? Or would you still fear being cast aside again? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. Elena's hand lingered on the doorframe, knuckles white from how tightly she held it. The storm outside roared like an echo of the one raging inside her chest. Gabriel waited, his eyes fixed on her, every ounce of pride stripped away. He had never looked so vulnerable. For once, the great Gabriel Lancaster wasn't the untouchable billionaire. He was simply a man, begging not to be abandoned. Elena's throat tightened. "Do you know what you asked of me that night in the library?" Gabriel frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You asked me to stay," she whispered. "And I did. I stayed through your storms, your silences, your doubts. I stayed because I thought, Maybe you wanted me." His voice was raw. "I did. I do. But when I needed you most," she continued, her voice breaking, "you stayed silent." Gabriel flinched as if struck. "I know. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life." He leaned forward, his voice urgent. "But don't let that one failure erase everything else. Don't let Clarissa's poison steal what we found." Elena's chest heaved. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to step into his arms, to let herself finally rest in the warmth he offered. But the fear was sharp. "And if I take this risk? If I give you my heart, what happens when you change your mind?" Gabriel's eyes burned with fierce intensity. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving I won't. Because losing you once nearly destroyed me. Losing you again." He shook his head. "I wouldn't survive it." The silence between them stretched, fragile as glass. Elena looked at him, the man who had pretended paralysis to test love and discovered the wrong woman. The man who had nearly drowned in his own pride and grief. The man who, despite it all, had finally chosen to lay himself bare. Her heart made the choice before her mind could argue. Slowly, she stepped back, opening the door wider. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "Then don't survive without me." Gabriel's breath caught. For a heartbeat, he simply stared at her, disbelieving. Then his eyes closed briefly, relief and gratitude flooding his face. When he looked at her again, there was no doubt, no hesitation, only love. He wheeled himself forward into the small room, crossing the threshold between doubt and devotion. Elena reached for his hand, and when their fingers intertwined, it felt like a promise sealed. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, for the first time in years, Gabriel felt peace. Was Elena right to open the door to Gabriel again? Or should she have protected herself after all the pain? What would you have chosen? Tell me in the comments. The next morning, the storm had broken. The air outside was crisp and clear, the sky washed in pale gold as dawn crept over the estate. Elena rose early, the weight in her chest lighter than it had been in weeks. Gabriel's words from the night before lingered in her mind like a fragile flame. She had opened the door. She had let him in. Now came the harder part, seeing if love could survive in the daylight. She moved through her chores with quiet purpose, but her thoughts kept circling back to him. When she passed the garden, she noticed the roses glistening with raindrops. Many had been battered by the storm, their petals torn, but some still stood tall, vibrant against the morning sun. She paused, touching one gently. "You survived," she whispered. A soft smile touched her lips. "So will we." In the dining hall, Gabriel waited. He had risen earlier than usual, discarding the decanter of brandy he usually reached for at dawn. Instead, he had dressed in a crisp shirt, his hair combed back, his posture straight despite the wheelchair beneath him. When Elena entered, her eyes widened. "You're early," she said softly. "So are you," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. For a moment, silence hung between them. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of before, but a tentative one, like the pause before music begins. Gabriel broke it first. "Elena, thank you for last night, for giving me another chance I didn't deserve." She shook her head gently. "You don't need to thank me. You just need to prove me right." His smile deepened, something warmer shining in his eyes. "Then let me start now." He gestured toward the head of the table. "Sit, not as the maid, but as someone who belongs here." Elena hesitated, glancing at the empty chair. Her hands fidgeted with the apron tied around her waist. "Gabriel," he leaned forward. "Please." Her chest tightened. Slowly, she untied the apron, set it aside, and sat across from him. For the first time, she felt not like an outsider in the grand dining room, but like she belonged. Gabriel's gaze softened as he watched her. "This house has been a prison for me for years. Empty, cold, full of ghosts. You brought it back to life. You brought me back to life." Her eyes glistened. "And you reminded me I wasn't invisible." The words hung between them, fragile and powerful all at once. He reached across the table, offering his hand. She placed hers in his, their fingers weaving together naturally, as though they had always been meant to fit. For the first time in years, breakfast in the Lancaster mansion was not an empty ritual. It was a promise. But outside, shadows still lingered. Clarissa had not vanished quietly after her triumph in the drawing room. She watched from afar, bitterness curdling her pride. Seeing Gabriel and Elena together again only deepened her fury. If she couldn't have Gabriel, she would make certain no one else could either. And she still had one last move to play. Do you think love can truly heal the scars of betrayal? Or are some wounds too deep to mend? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Clarissa returned to the Lancaster estate like a storm in human form. She swept into the grand hall uninvited, her heels striking the marble floor with sharp precision. "Gabriel," she called, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. "We need to talk." Gabriel was in the drawing room with Elena when she appeared, her presence filling the space like poison. His jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. "There's nothing left to say, Clarissa," he said firmly. "Oh, but there is." She moved closer, her eyes flicking to Elena with disdain. "Do you really think the world will accept this?" She gestured at Elena as though she were a stain on the room. "A maid playing the mistress of the house? Do you think society will welcome her, Gabriel? Or will they laugh behind your back, just as they laughed at her in front of you?" Elena stiffened, the memory of that night still raw. But before she could speak, Gabriel cut in. "They won't laugh," he said, his voice sharp with conviction. "And if they do, let them. I've spent too long caring about appearances, about pleasing people who never gave a damn about me. That ends now." Clarissa blinked, momentarily stunned. Gabriel had never spoken to her, or anyone in their circle, with such blunt fire. He reached for Elena's hand, gripping it tightly. "Elena is worth more than all of them combined. She's the one who stayed when everyone else, including you, proved their love was a lie." Elena's breath caught, her heart swelling. Clarissa's composure cracked, anger flashing in her eyes. "You'll regret this, Gabriel. She'll ruin you." "No," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on Elena. "She's the only thing that saved me." For the first time, Clarissa faltered. The arrogance in her expression faltered under the weight of Gabriel's certainty. She realized her power over him was gone, and would never return. With a bitter laugh, she turned on her heel. "You're a fool," she spat, striding toward the door. Gabriel didn't flinch. "Maybe," he replied, "but I'd rather be a fool in love than a coward in chains." The door slammed behind her, leaving only silence. Elena looked at Gabriel, tears brimming in her eyes. "You meant that?" she whispered. He squeezed her hand, his voice steady. "Every word." And in that moment, Clarissa's shadow finally lifted from the house. Have you ever seen someone try to sabotage a relationship, only to make the love even stronger? How did it play out? Share your story in the comments. That night, after Clarissa's departure, the mansion felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted from its very walls. For the first time in years, the corridors no longer echoed with emptiness but with a quiet sense of hope. Gabriel invited Elena into the garden, where the storm had once trapped them together. The roses glistened in the moonlight, their petals still damp from the day's rain. He paused by one bush, its blossoms battered but not broken. "Do you remember the night you found me out here?" he asked softly. Elena smiled faintly. "You said the roses reminded you of yourself. Beautiful once, but fading." Gabriel nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I was wrong. They weren't fading. They were waiting, just like me." Her breath caught as he reached into his pocket and drew out a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple ring, elegant and timeless. "Elena," he said, his voice steady though his hand trembled. "I don't want to pretend anymore, not about who I am or what I feel. You saved my life in more ways than one. Will you give me the honor of being the one who walks beside you, not above you?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, she was that girl again, the one who feared invisibility, who believed love was something she'd never be worthy of. But then she saw the truth in his eyes. Not pity, not condescension, but love. Fierce, unyielding love. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. 1,000 times, yes. Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger, his chest tight with emotion. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. You've made me the richest man alive, and it has nothing to do with money. Elena laughed through her tears, the sound soft and radiant. And you've made me feel seen, Gabriel. Truly seen. They stood there in the moonlit garden, the storm long behind them, their hands entwined. For Gabriel, it was redemption. For Elena, it was belonging. For both, it was love, hard-won, but unbreakable. Weeks later, the news of Gabriel's engagement spread. Some in high society scoffed, unable to comprehend a billionaire choosing a maid over a socialite. But Gabriel and Elena paid no mind. The mansion that had once been a hollow monument to pride was now filled with warmth and laughter. Gabriel returned to his business with new vigor, but never again let it consume him. Elena tended the roses, her gentle touch keeping them blooming year-round. And in quiet moments, when Gabriel caught her humming as she worked, or when Elena looked up to see him watching with soft devotion, they both knew. Love had found them when they least expected it, and it had saved them both. And so, Gabriel and Elena proved that love isn't about wealth, power, or appearances. It's about being truly seen, even at your weakest. Their story reminds us that sometimes, the people the world overlooks are the ones who hold the purest hearts. Do you believe true love can cross boundaries of wealth, status, and fear, or do those differences always win in the end? Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me what part of Gabriel and Elena's story touched you most.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.